The more you think about it, the more likely it is that he's calculated that any change of course at this point in time would, in his eyes, be a humiliation. It would be backing down in the front of enormous American pressure.
And backing down, while not unheard of for Saddam Hussein, is not something he likes to do.
He has outlasted so many events, other leaders, that I think this gives him confidence that he can do it again.
A confidence traced from his origins as a tough street kid who ran away from his own family to learn radical Arab nationalism from an idolized uncle, to his days as a political assassin, the way he made his way up through the Iraqi Ba'athist Party. The analysts see not a madman, but something worse.
This is a judicious political calculator who is by no means irrational, but is dangerous to the extreme. From early on, this man has been obsessed with dreams of glory, with the goal of becoming the preeminent strongman in the Arab world.
He sees himself as another Nebuchadnezzar, the biblical Babylonian king who drove the Jews from Jerusalem, or as another Gamal Abdel Nasser, who took the Suez Canal for the Arab cause, or as Anwar Sadat, who drove the Israelis from the canal in war and won it and the Sinai back in peace.
In the Arab world, one can gain honor through losing in battle. And it may well be that Saddam is calculating that the mantle of heroic leadership would be strengthened if he does have the courage to stand up to the West.
It's an attitude that dates from the Crusades and was reinforced by the recent colonial past.
The word dignity is a word that Saddam uses very frequently. In my view, he's got a Rodney Dangerfield complex. He wants respect.
And it's an attitude forged in the brutal, often deadly game of Iraqi politics.
His mindset, as some people have said, is straight out of The Godfather. That this is a sort of a mafia don who understands his own power arrangements and his own principles and his own values very well, but has an awful difficulty relating to what goes on in the rest of the world.
Defying the force arrayed against him may seem mad, but Saddam has described himself as a defiant spirit. For now, he seems to have chosen the uncertainties of war and its glories rather than the certainty of capitulation and defeat. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Washington.
Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, Tom Fenton on Israeli plans to shoot back if Iraq attacks, and Bruce Morton on worry and resolve across the United States. Israeli troops shot and killed 2 Arabs in the occupied territories today as Palestinians rioted in protest over the killing of 3 PLO leaders last night in Tunis. Israel said it had nothing to do with the assassinations. Police in Tunis arrested a gunman described as a renegade bodyguard linked to the terrorist PLO faction of Abu Nudal. Israeli military commanders today warned that if Israel is attacked, it can strike back against targets anywhere in Iraq. Tom Fenton is in Tel Aviv.
In a public display of normally secret information, Israel pinpointed Iraqi targets it is prepared to hit if attacked. The Air Force Chief of Staff said Israeli jets could attack missile bases in western Iraq in 30 minutes and Baghdad in less than an hour, despite the distances and technical problems.
We have developed in the last several months the tactics and techniques and the capabilities of doing it if it's needed.
The Israelis are clearly worried by the U.S. reluctance to coordinate battle plans.
We have no promises and no coordination with the United States so far at all.
Israel is relying on its own defenses, now in a high state of alert, to meet the threat of Iraqi bombers and missiles. It suspects that up to 20 of the Iraqi missiles may have chemical warheads. The Israelis have promised the U.S. they will not strike first, but are not convinced that the U.S. Air Force can do the entire job of knocking out the missiles.
We are not absolutely sure that they can do it good as we can do it, because we are more experienced. And we might see Israeli airplanes flying over after the Americans will try.
As the Israelis wait tonight for a possible Iraqi attack, there are fears that Israeli and American warplanes may end up in the same airspace. The Israelis have an urgent message for America. Unless the U.S. agrees to more coordination, Israeli and American pilots might accidentally shoot each other down. Tom Fenton, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
President Bush is counting on the Soviets as part of the coalition against Iraq. Against that backdrop, Soviet troops stepped up their pressure on the pro-freedom movements of the Baltic states today. In Latvia, Communist Party leaders called a rally to promote a takeover by a pro-Kremlin committee. Latvian leaders predicted a military assault against their elected government, similar to what happened over the weekend in Lithuania. Gorbachev named a new Soviet foreign minister today to succeed Edward Shevardnadze. He is Alexander Besmertnik, the current ambassador to the United States. President Bush had a spokesman say that he respects and can work with the man. Stay with us now for more news, including Rita Braver, on a U.S. Supreme Court decision that could roll back desegregation in many schools.
Will we go to war with Iraq? Dan Rather joins Charles Kuralt and Leslie Stahl as the deadline expires on a special edition of America Tonight.
Across the land today, in the wake of vanishing hope for peace in the Persian Gulf, there was, of course, a growing sense of concern. Support for our troops, worry about our troops. The terrible hands of the clock moved toward midnight, and Bruce Morton measured this fateful day in our continuing coverage of Countdown to Confrontation.
Flag raising, the Presidio, San Francisco, 6 a.m. Only hours left till the UN deadline.
I have a lot of friends over there in the desert, and I don't believe in the war, but I believe in going out and supporting them.
7 a.m., anti-war demonstrators outside San Francisco's Federal Building. 8 a.m., the flag goes up aboard the minesweeper Gallant.
It's do or die time.
Young boy never dreamed that he'd be going to war.
8:45, end of an all-night anti-war vigil in Washington, D.C. At a press conference a few minutes later, tributes to a peace-loving man.
For this is the birthday of the late Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., a champion of peace.
Getting on for 9 o'clock, commuter time in New York's Grand Central Station. Only about 15 hours now.
Oh, we're wide open for a lot of terrorism. There's no way that you can predict what's going to happen. I think that's the scariest thing about it.
We don't want another one of those black walls in Washington with our names on it.
Junior high school starts in Des Moines, Iowa, but the kids are outside protesting the war. School starts in West Palm Beach, Florida. The kids are wearing red, white, and blue.
It's scary. It's pretty scary. I mean, noticing that lives could be destroyed and people could be dead.
Almost 10 o'clock, Times Square, New York. 13-year-old Molly Suggs has skipped school to protest the war. About 14 hours now. 12 noon. Bells ring in many churches in Los Angeles, in New York. The House of Representatives opens with a prayer.
Especially this day do we pray for our president and all the leaders of the nations.
At the Silver Star Barbershop in downtown Atlanta, barber Gus Jordan worries about the president, too.
I don't see how in the world he could have gotten any sleep last night or even tonight. You know, wondering whether or not he doing the right thing.
1 o'clock, the First Baptist Church in Washington. Prayers for a son.
We pray for our son, Greg. We pray for them all.
About the same time, on the campus of the University of Illinois, students burn a homemade Iraqi flag. At the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, they burn George Bush in effigy. Afternoon, anti-war protesters block the Bay Bridge connecting Oakland and San Francisco. It's the first time that's been closed since the earthquake. And across America, the sun sets. This short winter day has been full of worries and prayers and protests. No one knows what the next sunrise may bring. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
And that's the news from our world tonight. As we leave you for now, hours before the midnight Eastern U.S. time deadline for Iraq to get out of Kuwait, there are many scenarios for how a war could start, very few scenarios at the moment for preventing one. There is always a chance for a last-minute move away from war, but for now, the clock ticks, the world waits. Consistent with our hope of being a steady, reliable, dependable source of information for you, and to try to help you put this into perspective, Charles Kuralt, Leslie Stahl, and I will be here immediately after your late local news this evening with a special one-hour edition of America Tonight. Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News. I'll see you later, right after your late local news.